Welcome to Resilient Waters, Healing in the 10,000 Lakes. I'm Amy. Let's get connected. Today, I have a great guest for you. I want to welcome Terri Jorstad, marriage and family therapist, to this episode. Terri and I work in the same office at Northwinds Counseling Services in Rogers, Minnesota. She has been there for 11 years. Her marriage and family licensure is a family systems approach to therapy and focuses on effects of relationship interaction over individual psychology approaches. Her special area of clinical focus include how executive functioning is impacted similar by trauma history, anxiety, and depression diagnoses, along with developmental diagnoses like ADHD and autism and childhood emotional neglect. Executive functioning is at the heart of change, and Terri works with her clients on body integration so that cognitive work is possible. She uses a lot of science psychoeducation to inform her clients about different techniques to make sure that clients have informed consent before starting any treatment. Terri knows that boundaries are huge, and people should know what they're saying yes to in treatment. Clients are able to integrate therapy into their lives better if they understand and believe in the treatments that they are doing. Terri, I absolutely love all the things that you talk about. And if I can just say for people listening, I have referred many clients to you, Terri, over the years. Mm-hmm. And I always tell people, if you are looking for someone who can bring a calming presence to therapy, who's very grounded and can kind of create that type of energy for you, you need to see Terri. Awesome. Terri is so wonderful at that. In fact, I can attest to that too, just working with Terri over the years. Whenever I see her in between sessions or we get to hang out ever, Terri's just great at grounding, great at helping kind of bring everything back to this very nice, beautiful energy. So tell me a little bit more, tell the audience a little bit more, Terri, about how you came to therapy.
Mm-hmm. Well, I got my undergrad in sociology, so I was always very interested in interaction and observing. What does it mean to, what does it all mean? What's going on? How do we make sense of it all? I think that's the biggest thing that I try, or the reason I became a therapist is because I didn't feel like I feel like it took a long time to figure out myself. And I wanted to be able to support others in getting closer or further along with their own self-knowledge and integration. Sooner, right? And be a resource for that. So yes, that is essentially why I became a therapist.
So essentially you did the work first and then said, hey, let's share this with everybody because there's something to this.
Yeah. What's really interesting though is I still do believe we're always all doing the work. And I decided to become a therapist and I finished my graduate program. I had just started to have children, but truly my clinical focus developed through my own development. Development as a parent. I participated in early childhood family education classes because I realized after having children, I really didn't know much about parenting. I really felt unsure about how to, what did I just get myself into? I didn't feel like I knew much. And so I used the resources that are provided by ECFE.
Let's talk a little bit about that gem because how many people just are not aware that their community has this very rich resource? I think people are scared and intimidated when they first have kids and they're just like, oh, well, that's, for a certain population or maybe, this or that. But I know when you told me about it and I was like, oh, that's right. That is a really cool resource. And I remember taking my son, who is now 4, but it's such a beautiful place to be able to go meet other parents, talk about specific challenges that just kids have.
Be vulnerable in a safe place.
It is such a safe place. I love all the workers for the ECFE community. It's wonderful. Thank you for bringing that little gem up. I sometimes forget too. to bring that to people?
I still integrate it into all of my practice, honestly. Understanding temperament, right?
Yes.
One of the belief systems is that temperament is persistent across an entire lifetime. I am one of those believers. I know some don't agree, but I am one of those believers. And so I also, when I was learning about temperament and figuring out my own and working with understanding my kids' temperament and the whole developmental psychology of goodness of fit, right? If you're not the right fit for your kid, how do you still be nurturing and provide what they need to, work with their temperament? Because our temperaments, equal different needs. And each one that comes from us is different. Each child is so different.
Yes.
We can be similar to our children. We can be opposite to our children. And wouldn't you know that too similar or too different equals power struggles. And, we struggle a little bit more. So I was able, while I was learning that about my own family, I saw how it also worked really well with couples, honestly.
Oh, yes.
Because adults are still the little children, they were children once, but they're still, dealing with their own temperamental stuff that can affect relationships. So that's where I first started to integrate what I learned from ECFE into my clinical focus when I was working with couples when I was younger and had a young family. And then also, I'm deeply rooted and will forever be deeply rooted in developmental psychology, because we are always making connections back. Now that, our world is becoming a lot more focused on trauma and understanding trauma, our understanding of developmental psychology and the things that go wrong or the needs that don't get met, right?
Yes.
That informs pictures here and now for a lot of people. And what they perform and what they act out now has a lot to do with what happened then. So I integrate that quite a bit as well.
Yes, I always tell people, our brains are growing through that time. And so everybody's brains grow a little bit differently depending on the experiences that we do or don't get. And so we need to understand that at the time of when it happened, to get that snapshot of where your brain was and then how it grew. We're all very unique and different, and that's great. And to understand yourself, we do need to understand developmental psychology. It's so factual based and so important. So, we can have hours of talk on this, can't we, Terri? I think we already do.
I think, and if people don't have an understanding of it, I think it also leads to a lot of self-criticism or the criticism of others, judgments, and we need to also be careful and conscious of that. Most of the people I work with, large amount, have a very hard time being gentle with themselves. And like you say, have this frame of understanding themselves and reasons, okay, if I wasn't in charge of all of that when I was a child, how do I allow myself to be gentle with that now? I wasn't in charge then, but I am in charge now. So how do I be gentle with those parts of me that, might still be acting stuff out but also hold myself accountable as an adult, right? To do the work now and get to living the kind of life that I want to live.
Yes. I know anyone who's listening to these podcasts will hear some of this language come out a lot as us mental health providers talk, this parts talk. Like, part of me feels this way, a part of me feels that way. And I think sometimes that language can be hard when you're first kind of exploring parts of yourself, because it feels very like that language is so strange. It's not normal language, but I love being able to talk with you and other providers about how useful that way of thinking can be, because sometimes I feel this way and sometimes I feel this way. Sometimes they really actually clash inside. I have these internal conflicts. So when we talk about parts, we don't have to think about it in a I'll say like a Hollywood way, but we can think about it in I am a lot of different parts. I am a lot. There's a lot to me. I'm complex. And part of that is that developmental psychology. Yeah. Because I grew complex over time. So I love these conversations. Tell me a little bit about the populations that you tend to work with. What's a good fit if someone's coming to see Terri?
Well, I ended up part of my developmental process was I, took a little sideways move more toward autism spectrum because when my son was about 4, he was diagnosed as high functioning autism. So I had to take a deep dive into, understanding what that was, what does it mean? What does it mean for parenting? What does it mean for our lives in balance? All that kind of stuff. So as I shifted some of my focus to that, I did that deep dive into understanding executive function. So neurological disorders have an impact on our executive function. The theories about autism is it means that things are firing a little different, and we have underconnectivity in our area of social functioning in our brain and overconnectivity in other areas. So it means that they be brilliant and really brilliant in some areas, but socially really struggle because the theory is it's less connected, right?
Yeah.
So my practice, I've always had kind of an underlying rhythm of like the body calming, the grounding, mindfulness-based stress reduction. But when my practice and my own personal life and my practice shifted more toward understanding autism and treating autism, I had to really explore very alternative ways of body calming and the avenue of what they call sensory soothing. So I got to really understand much more of the complexities of our body, of our sensory presentation, and how it can differ so much when you have like autism or ADHD or something, any other neurological disorders. And so deep dive in that and become really good at being able to see all different kinds of people and understand out of their senses which ones are dominant and how can we use that knowledge to find sensory soothing tools. So if you're visual, you might have to do a lot of visualization because that might be a dominant sense. Or one of the things about sensory soothing and kind of integration processes in our bodies is that when we fire multiple senses at the same time, it tends to command our focus in our brain and it can allow us to relax. So, if you are envisioning that you're, or you're ever like on a roller coaster or something, and you might think, wow, I was just totally exhilarated and overwhelmed by the physical sensation of this, and I didn't think, right? Well, that can be really good sensory soothing for people. It can really calm their bodies or calm their minds to have a break from thinking to engage in something physical and sensory like that.
Right.
So yeah, that's a big part of also what I still do with people in as we develop our therapy is help them understand their own body, their own dominance of senses, and then what are the sensory soothing tools that are going to help them regulate and body calm to be able to do the cognitive work of therapy.
I love it. I love hearing you talk about this because, yes, I've always referred to you as kind of my expert on, neurological disorders like autism, ADHD, because you have done a lot of work. You have a lot of tools for that. But it's really fun to hear you talk about that sensory integration. And I'm connecting to some of the things that I hear you utilize within therapy that I've heard before, using, different music or tools like that, or just for that sensory calming. I know you've talked about tapping too. Do you want to talk a little bit about that? I don't know if everybody really knows what that is.
Yeah, so my history, I've integrated for my own self, my own body, mindfulness-based stress reduction, and several alternative methods for body calming. EFT is one of those that I think a lot of people think about tapping pressure points, emotional freedom technique. That's essentially what the acronym stands for, and this is one of them, okay? This is a karate chop spot.
Okay.
And you're tapping on pressure points, right?
Yeah.
So the idea of a pressure point in our body is that this is connected somewhere else in our body. Yep. So EFT is about practicing tapping pressure points, and the cognitive process is listening on the inside. Is there anywhere in my body that seems to be softening or relaxing in response to this tapping? And so we watch our bodies, physically, cognitive, we're just watching and observing our body. Sometimes we're going to feel a softening or release of a sensation somewhere else. And just that idea of observing the connectivity in our body really relaxes the body, because most people are focusing on my voice. Most people, so we have an auditory stimulation of that sensory, auditory sensory. Then we've also got the physical sensation of tapping. And then we also have the visual of the mind's eye. We can envision our internal body. And, so when I tap here, I have my thoughts go to the back of my legs. They're softening and kind of tingling a little bit. And in my mind's eye, I kind of travel there. So we are triggering 3 senses all at the same time. For a lot of people, it's really powerful, and it can really focus our energy. One of the things about integration processes, the research tells us 3 minutes of belly breathing, right, is all it takes to re-regulate fight or flight responses. And so I use that rule of thumb with a lot of other sensory soothing as well. If you're doing this and you are, focusing and paying attention to all of these senses, chances are you're not having a lot of automatic thought recurring in your mind. You're just focused on this, and you're regulating your body. So,
I love this.
Yeah.
This is so awesome. I think a lot of people are really going to resonate with, okay, I have those cyclical thoughts that are coming up. What are some ways that I can disrupt this? Because it's really frustrating, there's lots of different ways to do it, but this is such a wonderful get into your body and be grounded in the moment, because a lot of times those cyclical thoughts are either past or future. And so this is such a great tool. I am not trained in any of this, so this is great for me too. It's fantastic.
So it's similar when I went through mindfulness-based stress reduction, which is basically kind of an 8-week course. You go weekly, you practice mindfulness techniques for like 3 hours, and then you practice it at home in between. I remember being able to observe a physical shift, right, from the start of the process to the end of the process. Taking the position of sitting and just starting to belly breathe, which is in through the nose, bring it all the way down to your belly, pop, you fill up your diaphragm, and then out, and you observe that physical sensation. It makes an auditory sound. You just do that for 3 minutes, and I don't even have to do it for 3 minutes. If I take the position, my body responds with calming immediately for my entire life since I did that 12 years ago. It's
That's amazing.
Wonderful. Isn't that fantastic?
I love how the brain works, right? Like we practice that, and the first few times maybe it's a little more difficult. But once our body knows that state of being, it just reverts back as soon as we start doing those things. And we can use that.
Yeah, exactly. I found something similar with EFT when I started that probably like 6 or 7 years ago.
Oh, I love it. Now I want to get some EFT done.
So now I utilize EFT with, so we have the integration of, a deep dive into executive function, but then I still have all this history, and I work a ton with anxiety and depression disorders, because that's where I started, and community mental health, serious and persistent mental illness, that was my beginning training process. And so one of the things that over the years, we're starting to integrate, and our knowledge base is building, is, gosh, if it isn't all a neurological disorder, right? Like anxiety is a neurological thing. It disrupts our cognition. It really changes the wiring of our brain, right?
Yeah.
Depression as well. So putting all these pieces together then, understanding executive function, the way that it applies to not only the neuroatypical population of autism spectrum ADHD, but now including everything else, and then the similarities and between that and trauma, as it affects the brain in very similar ways. So going further with that executive function focus, we are now thinking about, how do we use all of this knowledge in our trauma treatment approaches? And so that's where I utilize EFT tapping in a process called, it's a process from, I was trained as a family trauma professional.
Yep.
And in that line of thinking, it was using trauma timelines, so an understanding of points in history, a system called abbreviated processing, because we're really coming to understand the importance of language and what we do verbally as it connects to what we feel internally. Because all of these parts of our brain are wiring and firing, but there's the verbal part of our brain too. And sometimes we have people who just continuously kind of maybe re-traumatize themselves by telling the story over and over and over again, where in fact, if we did it in an abbreviated way, we change the path by adding some movement and some relaxation, we can make different things happen.
Yes, and this is something that you're going to hear over and over if you are looking at different trauma therapies, is we're talking about finding a different route for our neurology to take. Same thing with, like I do EMDR and things like that. It's all about we know that path of re-traumatizing sometimes, or that path that's not really helpful or connected to maybe a negative cognition. Let's start to pave a new one. And again, that's where the first time you do this, it's going to feel different or be difficult or not feel the best. But the more we practice it and the more we do the tapping and we do different things with it, it's going to help pave that new way of being. And pretty soon that's going to be deeper and more useful and more automatic than the old way, where it was
more automatic,
maybe more harmful.
Right, exactly. I always tell people, I can't make your thoughts go away, but I can make them less powerful. We can definitely
we don't take
steer
away
our
neurology.
Mind. Yeah, no.
That's not how it works. That's maybe like a brain injury, but we don't do that.
Yep.
Right? Yep. But you have choice, though. And I think that agency there of, I do have choice in these thoughts. I do have choice in the way that I move forward, can be so wonderful for people to kind of make that connection with it doesn't control me. I get to control me, even my thoughts.
Yeah, and that's where, when I start with people, my first weeks of therapy with people are all about them learning body calming techniques, because people need evidence to face hard things. They need to trust that they can calm their bodies down, that they have the methods that they need in order to go to hard places and still be able to leave out of the therapy room feeling good, feeling okay. So that's where I think we make sure that we have a firm foundation in people's ability to body calm before we do any of the cognitive work of therapy.
Yes, and you and I have worked together so much that I call that resourcing. Like, let's get our resources together. Let's pool our gifts and our strengths and really get them ready. And then if we want to do some of that trauma work or those kinds of things, we know how to do that. And we can stay grounded in the room here today to do that. And you do a great job with that. And I can say that because I know that you do. It's wonderful. Just being in Terri's presence is grounding for me anyway.
Thank you.
But okay, so we've talked a bit about some of the wonderful things that you do. Tell us a little bit about how people can get in touch with you. Do you have openings?
So right now, my main openings are going to be daytime, because I work, with kids that have attention issues or, autism spectrum, and, then all this ADHD, anxiety. My afternoons tend to get booked up with kids, and they have those spaces. So mostly daytime, maybe a handful, a couple here or there. But yeah, a few openings right now, but mostly daytime, and I offer both in-person and telehealth. I work Monday, Tuesday, Thursday in person, and then Wednesday, Friday This is my home office.
Yeah, so if you do telehealth, this is what you'll see with Terri.
This is what you'll see. My Beatles clock and my sage and my little artwork behind me. Yeah.
It's fantastic. You know, I think people, just to kind of like give people a heads up, I think that's going to be some of the best case scenarios when you call in to get therapy is there any openings at all? And to have the expectation of getting an evening or late afternoon appointment can be really hard, especially at first. And so, you know, maybe over time things might open up for therapists, but when you first call in, I think it's good to kind of have it in mind that you may need to come in during the daytime. Lunch hours do tend to book up fast too.
That's true.
But you can try. But even to have some openings, I just hear a lot of people are just full. So the fact that you have openings is wonderful. So shout out for Terri. If you're connecting here, please give a call soon, because we never know when that's going to book up.
Yeah, and the holidays too. We tend to really condense around the holidays because if we take any time off, we're fitting in a lot of people before and after. So for me, it's probably realistic to be in the next week or then after the holidays, honestly, with the way that the schedule goes and the number of people that would like to get in before the holidays. I want to be able to start with people and be able to see them consistently, weekly, because building a relationship with someone, I usually start at least 6 weeks, weekly sessions before skills are developed, and people have any sense of comfort with more time in between. It takes some time to build that relationship, but usually 6 to 8 weeks on the front end of weekly therapy is how it goes. So I like to make sure that I'm able to offer that to people for starting out as well.
I do notice too, when people first come in, there's that like feeling of urgency and, you know, they want relief. And so the best way to do that is that consistency of weekly. For some, it might be even more than that, but typically I think we do see weekly. So just for expectations of whenever someone is looking to get in and start that process. Let's talk about like accessibility, payment. Do you take insurance? What does that look like? Private pay?
Yep. Our company bills insurance. I'm in network with all major insurers. No EAPs, unfortunately. Right. But yes, in network, I take insurance. Definitely have structures for sliding scale fees as well.
Okay, great. And I'll link Northwind's counseling, because that's where we're both at. I'll link that in the notes below, so you can find Terri there. I think our phone number and your email is listed on there to get in contact to schedule. Are there any other places that people can find you, or links that you want to share, resources?
If you looked me up on Psychology Today, you'd also find me there. But sometimes those phone numbers that are associated with us are kind of obscure, so I don't ever list it. But put me in the search box, you'll find me in Psychology Today.
Sounds good. I will go ahead and link our website, and people can look that up for themselves. I'll also put a link to the ECFE page. I'm sure it's a little bit different depending on your district and where you're at locally, but just maybe some main information about that. Now, is there anything that you'd like to share? I know we've shared a lot, with tapping resources, but is there something that you'd like to share with people that you find helpful, that you'd like them to know?
Gentle with yourself, right?
Yeah.
I am gentle with others because ultimately I'm very gentle with myself as well in terms of my growth and learning processes, because I work so much with kids. I'm very in tune with Dan Siegel. Love all of his resources. Mindsight. Let me see if I don't know if I've got one. I must have taken it to work. The teenage one. Just love all of those resources. The concepts of Mindsight, the concepts of interpersonal neurobiology. Those are kind of foundational to my knowledge and how I work with myself and how I try to work with my kids, and how I work with the people in therapy is through the understanding of those things. So I really try to stay grounded in those kind of conceptual models as well.
Thank you for bringing that up. I will go ahead and link Dan Siegel's stuff below. I use Whole Brain Child, and there's even a workbook for families for that one that I love. Used it in my own home, use it in practice all the time. It's just, Dan does a great way of presenting neurology in a way that isn't overwhelming for parents.
The handy model of the brain. Here's our amygdala, right?
Yep, right in the center. And then we just get disconnected. And it happens to all of us, right? And so it's a wonderful tool to utilize. So if you're looking to get started with something, I highly recommend that. Thanks for bringing that to light. Now, I always ask, people when they come on here if they have a question that they, a fun question to be able to bring. So one of the questions on there was, is there a practice that you use for self-calming or self-care that you'd want to share with us?
Yep. Because I have history in mindfulness and lots of body-based regulation, I use yoga regularly. So everything from the core, right? And movement from the core. And yoga is just really wonderful in how the practices teach you to be with your body, notice your body, and stretching and movement. Also, Tai Chi is another really good one. And especially as we're aging, we activating synovial fluid, doing very circular movements and things like that is just really good for our bodies. So I try to stay current with those. I use those things and really try to continue to integrate that into my life for my own balance and wellness. And then some types of breathing techniques. Other than just, belly breathing, there are some types of breathing techniques that really help with resetting our neurology in a way. So I utilize a lot of, our other colleagues out there who really do great work with body work. So I actively practice and participate in what they offer as well.
I do too. I know that there are trauma-trained yoga instructors out there, and hopefully maybe I'll get someone to come and be a guest speaker on here for that as well, because it's a great resource. But yes, I never feel as good as when I'm doing regular yoga. And I think that, you had talked about before that mind's eye. Yoga is great with that, because you really do have to pay attention so you don't maybe fall over or just, when you're doing certain poses, but you're really activating inside, and that's such a wonderful practice to be able to regulate. That's those resources up front, super helpful. Whenever I hear someone come in and say, oh, I do yoga on a regular basis, I'm like, that's awesome, that's great, we can use so much of that in here. And
I think as we're dealing with facing the things that are trapped in our mind, trapped in our memory, the reality that memory can bring a whole body response, through trauma. I always tell people, we got to keep that moving. Don't let it stop. Keep moving it through you and out of you. And movement and body calming really allow us to, don't let it get locked up in there anywhere. Just keep it moving. So all the somatic stuff, I think, is really valuable for that too. And even any other our sensory processes of visualization, we can make it go, right? I'm an artist too, so creativity is huge. And so I've also been exploring ACT, acceptance and commitment therapy, and I really love the extent to which it helps us utilize what they call it diffusion, but I like to also call it abstraction. I like to play with the mind and help people use their dominant senses to move things through their mind and just work with it in a very different way. Another way to not let it get stuck and stay in you. Yeah.
Yes. Oh, I love that. And yes, I remember first meeting you and like walking into your office. Terri has this absolutely beautiful painting on her wall that she did herself, because again, she is an artist. I will tell you that. And it's this huge neuron. Yeah. And it's so cool. I love seeing that every time I come in and see you. So
thanks.
So fun. Well, I hope that people are able to connect with you soon. I just wanted to note, too, that we're recording here at the end of November, so just so people are aware for that timeline if they're looking to get in with you.
Awesome.
But thank you so much for joining us, and thanks for everyone who's listening today. All right, guys, this is the legal stuff, the disclaimer. The podcast is intended for educational purposes only. The information provided is not a substitute for professional therapeutic advice or counseling. Always consult with a qualified mental health professional for any personal concerns or issues. The views expressed on this podcast are those of the host and guest and do not represent the views of any affiliated institution or organization. Listener discretion is advised.